It's been 84 years. 84! Since I was able to connect my Assassin's Creed Odyssey DLC. Yeah. Those who have followed me online for a while know how important Assassin's Creed Odyssey is to me. I've made a number of videos about this game and I streamed it for a good long time and actually finished the base game on stream. To catch everyone up, here's a little montage for all of you.
They're so close!
What do you say?
Yes! I say yes! Let's go to the beach each! Ninky Minjad! His skirt came up when I killed him. And is still up. What is happening? What about it? It isn't fair. I've had enough now. I want my share, can't you see? I wanna see big old titty.
So after finishing the game back in 2021, I bought and downloaded the Atlantis DLC, which is my most anticipated story because, well, I'm bi. That might explain enough. I love Greek mythology. It's a special interest of mine. And I knew that the Atlantis DLC was going to heavily feature ancient Greek mythology. So I knew I had to have it. I knew I had to play it. And upon beginning my stream where I had planned to start the DLC suddenly vanished from my Ubisoft Connect.
I think there's been a glitch.
This was around the time when Ubisoft was changing from their Uplay system to Ubisoft Connect. And listen, I've had 2 years to think about this and I went through a lot of chat with Ubisoft support. And I think that somewhere along the lines of them changing over the systems, it created a glitch in my account and many other accounts, and it disconnected the DLC from my account, so I was unable to play it. I know at one point I could see the DLC, and then sometime after Ubisoft Connect came around, it was gone. Ultimately, the Ubisoft support team, bless them, thank you so much for their help all those years ago. They ended up not being able to do anything to help me. And for the longest time, I just let it be that. You know, over 2 years, my favorite game, the most anticipated DLC for me of my lifetime probably, was just out of my grasp. And I pretty much accepted the fact. And every time I've brought up how the story was such an agonizing time for me because we tried for so long. I sent so many screenshots. I spoke to so many different people that couldn't help me. And ultimately, we got nowhere with it. And I was so close at this point to completely giving up. My partner just started playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey again and planned to finish it, and he had been moving through the first of the DLCs and was moving on to Atlantis shortly, and I was like, well, I'll just watch him play. And then one random night I had a little idea and tried to buy the DLC again. I could buy it again on a different platform, and lo and behold, I finally got the DLC to work. I don't know if I can even stress to you how much of an experience this was. It really was such... I went through so much to try and make this happen, and to have it be such an easy fix in the end where all I had to do was just buy it on a completely separate platform. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I know things that I don't know, so I'm just not going to say about it. But in any case, I was now able to play the Assassin's Creed Odyssey Atlantis DLC. Honestly, I could pinch myself that I'm here right now. Like 2 years ago, I never would have thought this would have been a thing. So... my brain is like, what was that? So in today's video, I am going to review the Assassin's Creed Odyssey Atlantis DLC in its entirety and let you know whether or not it lived up to my expectations, what I imagined it was going to contain in my head, and we're going to go over it chapter by chapter. Say, Ella, let's get going. The first chapter of the DLC has Cassandra travel to Elysium to find a mysterious and important power source linked to her staff, bestowed upon her by Papa Pythagoras. And in order to do this, our girl Cass has to become a double agent, offering her loyalty to both the leader of the realm, Persephone, my love, I lied. And a rebellious faction who seek to overthrow her power. The premise of this paves a way for a number of branching scenarios that twist and turn based on what your choices are overall, just like in the base game. And some of this stuff is pretty in-depth, I would say. But ultimately, I feel like this does really suffer from an illusion of choice. And in the end, you end up on a pretty linear path. So the big players in this episode are Persephone, Hermes, Hecate, and Adonis. Before we even get properly into this, I am a huge fan of Lore Olympus. One moment. I am a huge fan of Lore Olympus. So Hades and Persephone, in my mind, they're beautiful and completely enamored by each other. So any idea that Persephone is not the sweetest, brightest little flower in the bunch, that's fake news to me. That's propaganda. It's a hate campaign. We're going to talk a little bit more about how I feel about Persephone in a moment, but let's get us set up with some of the mechanics of this chapter of the DLC. So one of the mechanics in this chapter was that dotted around the map are shrines to Persephone, and at each shrine is a statue of the goddess herself and 2 or 3 guards guarding that statue. Destroying those statues and the guards is a way to weaken Persephone's control over the realm, and at strongholds across the map, there are torches of Hypnos that serve the same kind of overall function, and also are just kind of one of the things to check off the list to complete the stronghold area and get bonus XP. And this all makes sense to me. I'm really spelling this out for you because I'm going to bring this up later, and I want you to remember it. I want you to know that I mentioned it. Keep it in your noggin, okay? There will be a pop quiz on it later. So my initial thoughts were, is this meant to be an interpretation of Atlantis? I was confused. For the whole first stream of me finally playing this DLC, I was questioning why it was called Fates of Atlantis if we were dropped into Elysium first. And then I started going on this thought journey where I was wondering, because Atlantis is a sunken city, right? So it's below the land of the living, I guess. So I was like, well, Atlantis below the land of the living, Elysium is part of the Underworld, below the land of the living. Are they trying to make a connection here? Like, I can see it, but are they making that connection? I'm not sure. Yeah, like, I'm happy to be here, but why am I here? And without spoiling my thoughts on the overall DLC, this isn't the last bit of confusion that I have experienced with this DLC. There were some really cool things about this chapter, things that I really enjoyed. I particularly loved the twist regarding Ross, Persephone's dog. It definitely felt like a proper twist, and I feel really stupid. I feel so stupid in my little head for not getting it. I do think some people smarter than me probably got this when they were playing it, and I won't spell out exactly what the twist is here. I do want to keep this largely as spoiler free as I can on those kinds of things, because ultimately I would like people to play this for themselves and have their own opinions. But I think you can probably work out what the twist might be without me having to spell it out for you. But yeah, I also really liked that in this story, there's a quest to gain power, and that quest to gain power, the whole reason that you're in Elysium, you can change your abilities from within the base game to more godly powers. And it's so fun. It's so fresh. It's a way that keeps something familiar. It gives it a little bit of pizzazz. It makes your experience in a godly realm just a little bit more fun and fancy. So I really liked it. I liked that some of them felt really powerful, but then also had some really severe drawbacks. So you could play it if you wanted to, but then there's that risk of things going south. If you like to play a little bit more dangerously, that's definitely an option for you. And I like the interpretations of a lot of the god elements that they've done for that. So that was really nice. There was also a really big character that I added to this story that directly links with Cassandra and her backstory. And you've got a pretty large choice about how their story goes, depending on the choices that you make, or so it seems, I guess. But regardless, their character being included, someone so close to Cassandra, was really fun, and it kept you grounded within the story of all the fantastical things that are happening around you. Something that I think was lacking within this chapter, and this will be something that I bring up later as well, is just the use of space. The map is a decent size. It's definitely smaller than the main Greek map of the base game, but it's bigger than I was expecting, and I think it's big for the sake of being big, quite frankly. The landscape isn't very interesting for us to travel through. There's almost no notable landmarks between going to story locations other than the shrines, and every single one of them looks the same, so is it really like I'm experiencing something new? There's also like next to no humans or spirits that are within that world. They kind of congregate to the, I guess, the strongholds or towns and things like that. But there's not walking between anything. And I guess because there's nothing to walk between, there's no real reason for them to walk at all, I guess. And I don't know if that was intentional, because I guess Elysium could be like a hyper exclusive place and only the cream of the crop ends up there. But it made the game feel a little bit hollow, so I'm not sure about the choice on that one. It looked very beautiful. I don't want to make it seem like it was unattractive. It was extremely beautiful. The designs of the notable locations that you do go to, they fit super well within the main space. Like, I think especially Hecate's area is stunning. It fits her so well. And I also really liked Hermes' area in particular, like his sort of region of the map, because it felt a little bit more different and made more use of vertical space within the map. Ultimately, it wasn't very interesting to traverse the map. Overall, I thought it was a really interesting place to start the DLC. I think if there had been more reason given to us for why we're there to begin with, I wouldn't have been so confused, and I probably could have enjoyed it a little bit more. It's a shame to me that it didn't link better with Pythagoras and the staff in general. A bit of a rocky start to the DLC, but I'm very happy to be here. The second chapter has us exploring the Underworld, run by the big man downstairs himself, Hades. Hades, my beloved. Hades, I could kiss you. Hades, Y'all don't need to hear this. That one's saved for my mind palace later. Since the Underworld is currently lacking a guardian to protect its gates, I ain't gonna say how that's happened. That's for you to find out. You've been asked by Hades to find replacements for guardians to protect each of the 4 gates, because without them, it's causing a little bit of chaos. A little bit of chaos outside the regular of Hades's chaotic ruling, where shades are trying to return themselves to the realm of the living, and it's interfering with the everyday run-of-the-mill citizens who weren't Pog champion enough to end up in Elysium. If Cassandra manages to find 4 guardians to protect the gates, Hades promises that he is going to teach her how to use the staff. So the big players in this episode include Hades, Charon, Cerberus, and Poseidon? Question mark. Coming from feeling a little bit all over the place from Elysium, the Underworld felt far more together, far more thought out overall. It felt a bit more lived in, which was one of my criticisms with the first chapter. It felt like there was more people bustling around, despite the scale seeming pretty well the same as Elysium. The landscape was really varied and encouraged you to explore a little bit more. It seems like when you would go to places that were maybe off the beaten track, there were conversations happening with just random people, and you could listen to them and hear some things about the space, kind of like in the base game, so it just felt a bit more together. You weren't really punished by the monotony of everything in between the waypoints of the story and those kind of key locations. So you're here, you're still on a search for power, the Keeper insights, to build up the strength of your staff and your special abilities. You're still breaking torches of Hypnos, and you're weakening the power of the region because you're trying to outwit Hades, essentially. You know that he said that he's going to help you learn how to power up your staff and to use it properly, but you also know that he's a little bit of a trickster and he's probably not going to give you exactly what he's promised. So like, even if you didn't have a really direct reason for why you would want to weaken the power of the region, it at least feels like it makes a bit more sense, because I think the general person, when you hear about the Underworld or Hell, Most people think it's run by a bad guy, right? So I think it makes more sense to the general public even if you don't have any knowledge about Greek mythology. There's a lot of really good side stories on this map. There's a lot of really exciting stories to follow. I found myself consistently doing little stories that I think would just I was just kind of doing them to do them, and then they would lead to something and I'd be really like wowed by it or just excited by it, especially coming from Elysium where I just kind of felt like everything was like exciting. I'm seeing someone that I know from knowing mythology, but the stories I mean, it's okay, but like, you know, nothing crazy. So yeah, that was really exciting. There was another really large character add to this chapter, and I think that's probably a huge part of what made this chapter so special to me. I think there's at least one big character. I can't remember. It's maybe been a month since I finished playing this DLC, recording this video, so there might be a character that I'm missing, but I know there's at least one character that everyone's going to be very, oh my god, about, and I'm not going to spoil who that is. It's exciting having a story that adds to a story that's already pretty well established in the base game, and so getting to see new things play out for them was just, it was epic. Now, I mentioned in the key characters that a little guy called Poseidon was also here. You might be wondering, what the fuck is he doing in the Underworld? I think a lot of people know that Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon are brothers, and if you're a Percy Jackson fan, you'll know that they're kind of the kings of the gods. They have their own domains that they rule over. Zeus has Olympus, Hades has the Underworld, and Poseidon has the sea. And what's in the sea? Atlantis. We're finally at the tie-in to the name of this DLC. And it's taken us halfway through the whole DLC to even be introduced to something relating to Atlantis. Or at least properly relating to Atlantis. I know there's chats with a godly spirit in between each chapter, and I'm gonna be so honest with you, they were so non-existent to me that I don't remember pretty much any of that. So if that's saying anything to you. Okay, why is Poseidon here? He's vibing with Hades. Of course he is. Just two bros chilling in the underworld. I won't continue that. So they've got a little bit of a bet going on about how successful you're going to be with recruiting these guardians, and I believe you also have a whole set of armor to retrieve as well as part of the bargain, or maybe just was part of how to help you get the guardians. I'll be honest, I don't remember why we were doing it, but we were doing it. I'm gonna be honest, this whole part was pretty poorly set up. It feels like there was no good reason to have Poseidon in the story at this point, other than as a tease for what's to come in the next chapter. He just kind of appeared and was talking to Hades. I got good vibes from him, so why would he be here? I mean, I got good vibes from him. Like, you can tell from Persephone, Hecate, Hades, they're all in this business for themselves. They only have their own interests in mind. But Poseidon seems like he's a little bit more feeling than that, and seems overall, he gives me a better impression than the other gods, let's say. No hate to any of those other gods for being that way, of course. I support women's wrongs, Persephone. I hope that you're paying attention. Before we end out this chapter's overall discussion, I just want to mention that I thought that the depictions of each of the gods so far was really good. Persephone and Hades are exactly how I would have imagined them. Even Hecate, I mean, I wasn't really sure what I was expecting, but I think what we got from her was good. It was really good. I thought it fit for what I know of her as a goddess. But holy moly! There's one character that threw me the fuck off, and I've already mentioned their name, so hopefully you know who this is going to be before I have to say it. The one who threw me off the most was definitely Charon. Every time I've ever seen him depicted in something or read him be depicted in something, he's always a kind of shadowy figure. He's cloaked in something. He doesn't speak like a humanoid. He barely resembles the other gods. He's kind of closer to a shade than a god as far as most of the depictions of him go. So when he came out, he doesn't talk very much. He's not very chatty. He's just doing his job. Little capitalist slave, get that coin. In this game, they just kind of made Karen a guy. Like, the guy has sick tats and completely blackened eyes, which given is creepy as hell. But it's definitely not the level of creepy that I was expecting for that character to be. He's just a guy. I mean, at least he looks Greek, so he fits within the kind of characters that we're seeing around the map. It makes sense. He feels like he fits there. But yeah, I kind of was expecting him to look way more ghoulish. I just had to comment on it. It was so funny, it threw me. Long story short, we find the Guardians, we skedaddle on to our final chapter with Poseidon to Atlantis. At long last, we are here. We've made it. I'm clapping like a white person on an airplane and the plane's just touched down. Like, we made it, boys. We've done it. The title of the DLC is finally here. This reminded me of how I felt when I was first watching the show Once Upon a Time, the Disney ABC show, where main character Emma Swan goes back to this little town of Storybrooke. It's been a long time since I watched this show, so I'm plucking these from my mind. And there's a curse on this town where storybook characters are all living normie lives and don't realize that they are actually fairy tale characters. When I was watching that show for the first time, in probably the first 2 episodes, I was like, this curse on the town is going to be lifted in the next episode. Probably. Like, based on the pacing of the episodes. And then by the time I got to episode 3, I was like, nah, god damn it, it's going to be this whole season. The whole season is going to be lifting the curse. Okay, I understand. So I had to reframe my expectations for the pacing of the show. Much like I did with Once Upon a Time, I had to reframe my expectations once we got to the Underworld that Atlantis was just going to be one chapter of this whole thing and not the entirety of the DLC. Or at least we weren't going to have a footnote of Elysium and then go into Atlantis, you know? Once we got to the Underworld, I had to readjust my expectations. So we're here with Poseidon because he has promised to fully teach us how to use our staff and how to better our own abilities and awaken our god powers or Isu powers, which I don't remember if it had been talked about earlier in the DLC, but it was definitely being talked about in a big way in the Atlantis chapter. Essentially, you're awakening like a third eye where you can hear more thoughts of the gods, and Cassandra feels kind of more in touch with her godly self. And Poseidon seems like a pretty benevolent ruler. When he introduces us to Atlantis, you definitely get the impression that he cares about the people that live there, although it doesn't seem like he fully understands the civil unrest that's going on between the Isu and the human occupants of Atlantis. So we've got a little bit of work to do here. The key players in this chapter are Poseidon, the sons of Poseidon, Atlas, Garidos, Ampheres, and Azaius. There are a number of stories going on here. There were stories about mysterious transformations. There were stories about secret cloning cults where people were being kidnapped. There was mystical Isu technology that could cure diseases permanently. Like, really interesting stuff. But again, I couldn't help but notice that this map was large for the sake of being large. I hate to sound like a broken record about this, but this map is so fucking boring. Outside of Poseidon's Mojo Dojo Casa House, everything looks pretty much the same. I understand that a city largely has the same kind of overall vibe throughout the whole place. There's no character between any area. In a city, there's different quarters and like districts, right? There's like a business district, an art district where you might have galleries. There's markets. There's lots of things going on. Here, outside of Poseidon's sons' houses, and in the game, there's more houses for Poseidon's sons than sons featured in the game. There's a quarry and there's some pretty nice looking canals, but there's nothing really else of note here. There's an arena, Not a lot going on, and it's very easy to get lost here because everything kind of looks the same. Like overall, to me, this felt really poorly designed. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong. It just seems lazy. I don't know, like I think kind of like Elysium, they probably could have benefited from having more ancient looking housing that still had kind of tech elements to make it feel more godly, but still have the aesthetic of something that looked ancient Greek. I know that you could probably argue that it looks like a modern day Greek island almost inspired with white houses and things like that. It's not. I don't know, it just felt lazy to me. I hate to say it, but it felt lazy. In all of these criticisms, I don't want to blame the devs for any of this. Like, it's clearly not because they didn't think it was needed. It's always one of those things where people were rushed, people were overworked, and corners had to be cut. So I understand. I don't want to seem like I'm picking on the devs for this because it's definitely not their fault. I understand a little bit how game development works, so I just want people to know that my criticism is not placed there, so don't get the wrong idea, please. Bringing it back to the pop quiz moment that I mentioned earlier, what were the items in Elysium that were used to weaken Persephone's hold over the domain? Statues, shrines, torches of Hypnos, right? Correct. Of course you did well. I knew you could get them. They were used to thwart her sympathizers and create a rebellion against her surprisingly tyrannical reign. And they were also used in the Underworld to help outwit Hades and his similarly tyrannical but more chaotic reign over the Underworld. So cool, right? That's a mechanic that has been brought up in 2 of the chapters, so understandably something similar would be used in this one, right? But we don't have a tyrannical leader, or at least, unless I'm completely misunderstanding the conversations that I had with Poseidon, I don't think any of the people have any issue with Poseidon himself. So how might we implement this in Atlantis, in an area where it doesn't have that same kind of hold from a dictator, I guess? That's a great question. Not even Ubisoft could answer that because they just smattered it into the game. With no rhyme or reason, you're still going to different houses, strongholds, a quarry, and doing those same things, but with no purpose attached to them. So why am I doing it? At that point, you're just doing it to check off things on a list. Why would you be wanting to destroy Poseidon's power if you have no issue with his power when he's seemingly an okay-ish dude? I know it's just to keep me doing little tasks, you know, and keep me grounded while fantastical things are happening in the story, but it's just so lazy to me. Like, you could give me one throwaway line and link it all for me, but instead you just get a help my people, go talk to my son Atlas and he will tell you some things that need to be done here. Like, it's just so lazy to me. Among a slew of other lazy decisions with this DLC, it's kind of just the cherry on top that shows that not enough care was given to this DLC. There's just no love in it. It feels just so hollow because I guess it was rushed. And again, no hate to the devs. It's not the devs' fault. The devs don't want to rush a product out before it's completed. They've got deadlines that are unreasonable to be met, like in many games, which is how these things happen, which is why I'm talking about it, because unless people make a fuss about it, these companies keep getting away with this kind of stuff. And that's not fair to the consumers who want to support these really cool stories that are coming out, but you know, that's just not good enough from a AAA studio. The game at this point was feeling really tedious to me, and despite there being some really interesting story beats, this whole part just felt really unfinished, like really unfinished. After the events of the DLC, Cassandra has some time for some much needed rest. This gal's been working overtime for too long. She's extremely tired from the burden of being the keeper of the staff, so she's relaxing on the island of Korfu, and after about a month of lounging, she has her slumber interrupted by 2 familiar faces, Herodotos and Barnabas, who want her to go on one final quest. If I hadn't played this chapter and just left the game having played the main portion of the DLC, I would have been extremely disappointed with this DLC. This chapter puts everything together. It finishes off both the base game of Odyssey and the DLCs, and it also really nicely sets up Valhalla. It actually got me so excited while I was playing it. There was so many things that made Valhalla make more sense to me. My mouth was agape when I was watching the final scene of this DLC. This is the part of the game that is the most worth playing, I think. Barnabas tells Cassandra that there is this little treasure hunt that he's heard about very innocently. He's clearly set up this really cute little quest for her because he misses the days of them all sailing together. She entertains this idea. She goes and starts the treasure hunt and finds out that there's a little more going on here that even Barnabas knew. Some really wild events happen here, and I really like what they added. The map was very small and it never felt like the space was being misused. There was a very short period of time between each location that you needed to go to. There's not a lot going on. It's the end of the DLC, but it was a good use of space, which we hadn't seen from earlier parts of the DLC. That's why I really want to make a point of praising this. And I think they've done this also in Valhalla. There have been extra maps in DLCs that they've done really well, where they've been small and really packed with things to do that feel worth the time. Even though I was exhausted by this point of playing the game, I found myself really enjoying this part of the DLC. Like, nothing can beat the ending of this DLC. Like, where you go, what you do, its impact. So my overall thoughts. I've said this a lot with the newer Assassin's Creed entries, probably Origins to now, I guess. So all of these newer open world Assassin's Creed games, they've got to fucking stop going to present day. It doesn't add anything. The story is so weak and it completely takes you out of the main story. The subplot of the present day stuff, it doesn't hit anymore. In the original games, the first games, going back to present day had an impact on the story. It had a purpose. I think they just do it now as a kind of legacy for the Assassin's Creed franchise. It has no place in this story. It's not needed. The times that you do go back, it's because Layla is in too deep. Her doctor wants her to come out because she's going to lose her mind to being in Cassandra's memories. And it never affects her. There's never a consequence of her going too deep in the game. The only thing that ever happens that is a consequence of Layla's actions is part of her having the staff. So it's not her going too deep. It's stupid. Don't take me out of the game. I don't like it. I don't want to go back. I want to be in my little ancient Greek world and stay there. Thank you. I live in the real world. I don't need to play it. It just makes the game less immersive. So if I can speak to Ubisoft directly, stop fucking doing that shit. I love your games. Stop fucking doing that shit. Like I've said before, both Atlantis and Elysium they're just too big. I said this already in the kind of chapter overview sections, but I have to mention it again because I was really frustrated by how many tedious tasks I had to do in order to complete the chapter altogether. Like, one of the tasks was waking up one of the guards from Persephone's control. It was kind of difficult to do that. You had to do it to two people. One of the other ones was to weaken Persephone's control enough via the statues and all the different Persephone like propaganda in Elysium. Why are you stifling my ability to enjoy a story by having me do such a tedious task that in all honesty doesn't really have any effect on the main game? It was just a chore, and like going through and doing all those tasks and there not being anything in between doing those tedious tasks, it made it a drag. It made it a drag amongst some pretty cool story that was happening with some cool characters. Like Hermes, he really fucking popped off, but you had to put me in this stupid place that was too big. Ay. If I had to rank the locations, I would definitely be putting the Underworld at the top. It was definitely my favorite by far. The atmosphere was more scary. Everything felt a bit closer and denser. I actually felt something with this chapter while I was playing it. I wasn't just doing silly little tasks. I was immersed in a story in this chapter, so it didn't feel like I was just doing something to fill my time, which was really nice. So I really enjoyed it, and I'd probably rank Elysium next because it had characters that I really enjoyed. I know Adonis, I know Hermes, I know Hecate. Like, their stories were more interesting to me. I apologize to Poseidon and his sons. I don't know very much about Poseidon's sons, so I don't really care as much about them. Their stories, don't get me wrong, they were interesting, but I wasn't as attached to them. It's kind of like the Spider-Man movie where all the Spider-Men were there. That's how this felt. It was like putting characters in for the sake of putting characters in because people go, oh my god, I know them, and it like hides a story not being as good because you're like wowed by the fact that they're there to begin with. So like I'd probably rank Atlantis last, which is a shame because that's what the DLC is named after. Ultimately, we're not playing games because they're big. We're not all currently playing Baldur's Gate 3 because it's a fucking massive game. We're playing it because the story is incredible, the characters are interesting, the setting has you addicted to looking and seeing every little detail that they've added because every single thing is so clearly filled with love and care and a lot of thought has gone into it. We want content. We don't want something that's big. If Baldur's Gate was a third of the size in terms of map and story, we would still enjoy that because it is so lovingly created. So we don't need to have a big scope of a game to enjoy it. And I know that I think Ubisoft has learned that, especially with Valhalla, which was, I think everyone knows my opinion on Valhalla and it just being too big. But I think that they are correcting themselves with Mirage, which is coming out later this year. So, you know, obviously this critique is for a game that they brought out a long time ago. So I can give them a little bit of a break because they've clearly learned from their mistakes, or learn from my perceived mistakes of their work. Visually, Elysium was definitely my favorite. It is warm and beautiful. There's flowers everywhere. I loved how all the Isu had like kind of golden veins, golden threads just kind of glowing from them that made them feel magical. The colors were stunning. It felt really inviting, which is really cool in a sense because when you think about the Underworld, or I suppose when you think about a traditional hell, if you're thinking about it in more Christian understanding, hell is meant to be super inviting and wonderful, and then when you get there you realize it was all a facade, it was a betrayal. And that is how Elysium kind of is, in this story at least. I think it was really good set dressing. In comparison, Atlantis feels really hollow and too same. And there's no distinct difference between any of the areas really. So it made you really confused about where you were going at every moment. The DLC reminded me a lot of the kind of overall theme of the BioShock series, where it talks a lot about a world that is devoid of religion, and then by the time you get to BioShock Infinite, it is a world that is completely overwhelmed by religion, and it shows why both of these things are not productive to a society and why you need to have a mixture of different perspectives and differences and all those kinds of things to try and make a more harmonious place to live. Like in BioShock, this DLC is showing us total chaos and total control, and why both of those things are not good for society and why you need to have a mix of both to have any kind of peace and harmony amongst the citizens. I thought that overall that it presented this fairly well for a DLC sized game. Like, I'm obviously not going to compare it completely to BioShock because that's a whole 3-game series and this is only, you know, like a 20-hour DLC. But I thought for the scope of it, it did a really good job at presenting those ideas to you in relation to Cassandra, especially because she's the keeper now and she's responsible for people. You know, Persephone definitely felt like a dictator, much to my dismay as a Persephone sympathizer. Hades felt like a controlling madman, unpredictable. I thought it was really good. I thought that that was conveyed pretty well to the audience. The boss fights in this DLC were really mixed in difficulty overall. I found them to be largely not very challenging. I accidentally made my own little handicap and I only realized it was my own handicap when I made it to the final boss fight in Atlantis, where I was constantly pressing right click so that I could get my bow out to try and shoot at people as my favorite way of playing the game. So every time I would try and dodge roll with my spacebar, it would just duck and I couldn't dodge roll anywhere. So I'd keep getting unnecessary hits by the bosses and I'd be like, why the fuck is this happening to me? It was me. It was never the game. There was never any issue with the game. It was me. I am the problem. Problem in chair, not in computer. Even then, I didn't think that the bosses were too challenging. Probably the boss that gave me the most difficulty was at the end of Elysium. And I think that was largely because I was stressed because I was streaming at the same time. So I couldn't like have a go, get it sussed out, and then on the second go, give it a proper attempt. I still ultimately am confused why the DLC was Atlantis or Fates of Atlantis. It only featured at the end of the whole thing, and it really felt like an afterthought to even call it that. I know that they wanted to make an excuse to put the vast amount of Greek mythology in this where they couldn't put it in the base game because it maybe wouldn't make as much sense. So I think they definitely could have done a little bit more brainstorming on how to execute this in a way that was maybe a little bit more impactful. Like, we didn't need to go to the kind of doors of Atlantis in the base game to start this DLC. It's unnecessary. We could have met Pythagoras anywhere and have him talk about the gods and have him present to us these stories that we experience. I think honestly that might have been a better way of doing it instead of having that character who I really can't remember her name show us this, because she didn't add anything either. It was kind of stupid having us talk to her. So if it was Pythagoras, it would have been more impactful because of his connection to Cassandra. I'm not going to spoil that, even though I know it's been a long time. This is going to sound so stupid, and it's not even really a criticism, but I do think it was a little bit misleading having them call it Atlantis, where it has no impact on the story. It could have been like the mythos of, I don't know, something else, something about the mythology of it all, because that's what it is. We're looking at mythology. I don't think it needed to be Atlantis. It was like a red herring almost. Okay, now that I've hardcore vomited on you about this game, I bet you're wondering whether or not this DLC lived up to my expectations after agonizing over this for the last 2 years, and this being, you know, my favorite game of all time. Was it worth the effort that I went to? All those months where I was every day talking to Ubisoft support? Did it meet the hype? Did it satisfy the brain worms? And I think to everyone's surprise, it did. Even though I've been really critical of this DLC, I did really enjoy myself. I would play anything that would have me back in ancient Greece playing as Cassandra. It's my favorite time. These stories are my favorite stories. I would do anything to keep exploring this, you know? New stuff is a bonus. You know, I've been wanting to replay the game because I love the game so much, and I love the setting so much. And I want to know if there's things that I didn't see the first time I played that I can enjoy on a second playthrough. So I do think it was worth the effort, although I don't understand why it needed to be so difficult. I would be honest, my expectations of the DLC were probably low because I understand the capabilities of Ubisoft with these kinds of games. I have come into this playing all of the Valhalla DLC, and so I know kind of what they're capable of creating, and I guess I knew to temper my expectations. I would actually say that this DLC is a lot better than most of the DLC that's in Valhalla. I think it probably helps that there's only 2 DLCs for Odyssey and there's like 8 for Valhalla, which is so unnecessary. I could go on and on. I do think that there was a lot of really interesting things that happened in this story, especially everything that happens in the Korfu part of the DLC. I definitely think that it's still worth playing. In fact, I really want you to play it, which is why I tried my best not to specifically spoil parts, because I want you to come and play it, because I think it was just fun. It was just silly and fun. I will forever be appreciative of Ubisoft for giving me so much joy in a game. It was great to see the end of Cassandra's story, even though, you know, we all know now that she appears in Valhalla briefly. I thought it was a really fitting way for us to send her off. I wonder if we're gonna see her again, you know, who knows? Maybe in Mirage? I don't know. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I had so much fun making it. I had so much fun playing it. I hope that you're all well. I hope that you're all hydrated, and I will see you all next time.